Luis Antonio Vargas is a pragmatic and emotionally reserved man. He believes that love isn't meant for him and considers marriage merely a business arrangement for managing his thriving coffee enterprise. Luis has neither the time nor the interest to look for a wife himself. Instead, he begins a written correspondence with an American woman named Julia Russell, who agrees to travel and become his bride. However, when Luis arrives to meet her, he is shocked. The woman who steps off the train looks nothing like the one in the photograph she had sent. Julia explains that she intentionally used another person's photo, not wanting Luis to be attracted to her based solely on appearance. She wanted to be appreciated for who she truly is, but Luis has his own secret. He never told Julia that he owns a prosperous business, keeping that part of his life hidden from her. The two head to Luis's estate and are married in a church. On their wedding night, they sleep in separate rooms, as Julia explains she can't immediately share a bed with a stranger and appreciates Luis's patience. The following morning, Julia brings Luis breakfast in bed, and he discovers something new about her. She drinks coffee, even though in her letters she claimed to prefer tea. Julia confesses that her sister used to read her letters, and she didn't want her to know she liked coffee. They settle into a quiet married life, getting to know each other better, and eventually Julia allows Luis to share her bed. From that moment, their routine becomes more vibrant. Luis feels happier than ever and shares his joy with his business partner, who expresses interest in meeting Julia, as she hasn't been seen in public for some time. Luis invites him to an upcoming theater performance in town. During the play, Julia becomes visibly distressed upon seeing one of the actors. During the intermission, she excuses herself and leaves. Luis follows and sees her speaking privately with the actor backstage. Julia doesn't tell him anything about this encounter and simply attempts to distract him with affection. Later, Luis receives a letter from Julia's sister, Emily, who asks for an update on how Julia is adjusting to her new life. She's concerned and even contacted the local embassy to inquire about her sister's whereabouts. Luis convinces Julia to write back, and she agrees. One night, after a nightmare, Julia is comforted by Luis, who notices several scars on her back. Julia intends to send the letter herself, but Luis offers to mail it for her. Luis takes Julia to the bank and offers her any amount of money for personal expenses. She's planning to visit a tailor for new dresses. One day, Luis encounters a man named Walter, who introduces himself as a private investigator and Emily's fiancé. Emily had sent him to check on Julia. Luis assures him that everything is fine but is ultimately forced to invite him over. Back home, Luis forgets about Walter when Julia showers him with affection over the arrival of new fabric for her dresses. Curious, Luis tries to see what Julia keeps in her chest, but she refuses, claiming she lost the key. When he hugs her, he detects the smell of cigars, and Julia admits she tried smoking. Luis informs Julia that Walter will be visiting for dinner. She appears fine with it but soon becomes visibly agitated. Even the singing of her pet bird starts to annoy her. The next day, the maid finds the bird dead. Luis begins to feel uneasy, and his suspicions grow when Emily arrives at his workplace. She shows him a letter she believes wasn't written by her sister and asserts that Julia and Emily are not related. Luis rushes home and finds Julia gone, along with all her belongings. Inside her chest, he finds photos of the real Julia and her clothes. At the bank, he learns that Julia has emptied almost all the money from his account. Devastated, Luis loses his home, turns to alcohol, and frequents questionable places. He truly loved Julia and now suffers deeply from her betrayal. In one of these establishments, Walter sits beside Luis. He says he's still looking for Emily, and Luis asks him to find his wife. The two begin their search and eventually discover that Julia is staying at a hotel. They check in at the same place. While Luis is distracted, Walter secretly replaces the bullets in Luis's gun with blanks, hoping to prevent any fatal outcomes. Luis finds his runaway wife at the hotel. She is now with a man named Colonel Vors, who knows her as Bonnie. He catches her writing a letter to her accomplice, the one who helped her assume the identity of Julia Russell. They had met the real Julia on the ship, and when Bonnie discovered the real purpose of the trip, she revealed it to Billy. Not long after, he claimed that Julia had suffered an accident. In truth, they had plotted to swindle Luis Vargas out of his fortune. Bonnie handed over the money to Billy and fled, stating that she had started developing genuine feelings for Luis, which prompted her sudden departure. Moreover, Billy had forced her to write the letter to Emily, meaning their deception would eventually come to light. Luis had also fallen for Bonnie, which is why he couldn't bring himself to harm her. He spent the night with her, and the next morning, Bonnie opened up about her past. She and Billy were raised in an orphanage, both turned to acting, and eventually drifted into a life of crime, targeting wealthy, solitary men. The Colonel was intended to be Bonnie's next victim, but when he came by in the morning, Luis turned him away. Luis tried to shake off Walter, who was still pursuing Bonnie in relation to Julia's mysterious vanishing. But getting rid of him wasn't easy. Walter tracked down their new residence and paid them a visit, making it clear that he, too, had feelings for Bonnie. A confrontation ensued, and during the scuffle, Luis accidentally fired a shot, and Walter collapsed. Several more gunshots followed, after which the detective remained motionless. Believing Walter to be dead, Bonnie sent Luis to the train station to buy tickets while she attempted to dispose of the body. But suddenly, Walter regained consciousness. It was actually her partner, Billy. He had known all along that Luis's gun was unloaded and faked being shot. Billy now demanded that Bonnie return to their criminal ways and finish conning Luis, since he still owned a valuable share in his company, which could be sold for a large sum. Billy insisted she carry out the plan and eliminate Luis afterward, claiming that someone like him could never truly accept her lifestyle, and she would always remain an outsider in his world. When Luis came back, he and Bonnie left together, unaware that Billy was trailing them. One night, haunted by a nightmare, Bonnie decided to try earning money another way. She taught Luis secret signs to use in a card game, but their scheme was quickly uncovered by seasoned gamblers. Luis was beaten and tossed onto the street, while Bonnie was forced to repay their debts with her body. Following this humiliation, Luis realized he had no other option but to sell his stake in the business. He believed the police were on his trail for killing the private investigator, so he kept their earnings hidden. Meanwhile, Bonnie met with Billy once more. He branded another scar on her back, marking another successful con. Luis returned with the money, and all that remained was for Bonnie to kill him and take the cash. Pretending there were rats in the house, she left to get poison. Later that night, Luis followed her and overheard her conspiring with Billy to murder him. When Bonnie returned, she found Luis waiting in the dark. She handed him a cup of coffee, which he quickly realized was laced with poison. Luis asked her for honesty, and she confessed the entire scheme. But upon realizing Luis truly loved her, Bonnie had a change of heart. Though he drank the poisoned coffee, she whisked him away before Billy could find them. Billy eventually tracked them down and threatened Bonnie's life. This time, Luis fired a real bullet. There were live rounds in the revolver. As witnesses approached the scene, Bonnie grabbed the weapon and finished Billy off to protect Luis. She begged them to call a doctor, as Luis had been poisoned. Bonnie was arrested, and she recounted the entire story to a priest who had come to grant her absolution before her execution. The young priest grew fond of Bonnie, perhaps even fell in love with her in his own way. In a shocking act, he broke the law by giving her his clothes, allowing Bonnie to escape the prison undetected. After escaping, she reunited with Luis, and together they earned a living as card hustlers. Bonnie would whisper to Luis the cards other players held. But wait, had he really planned to marry a stranger he had never even met? The tale of Luis and Bonnie is a gripping and morally complex exploration of love, deception, identity, and redemption. What begins as a calculated and emotionally guarded transaction, Luis seeking a wife through correspondence, soon spirals into a whirlwind of unexpected passion, betrayal, and dangerous consequences. At its core, this is a story about the illusions we craft for ourselves and others, and how easily those illusions can unravel when emotions begin to blur the boundaries between truth and lies. Luis Vargas, a man of structure and restraint, believes love is impractical and unnecessary. He views marriage as a functional alliance, a convenience. Yet, through Bonnie, a woman who enters his life under false pretenses, he discovers the unpredictable and transformative nature of real emotion. Bonnie, who once lived a life of manipulation and criminal seduction, finds herself caught between the role she plays and the person she might become. Her growing affection for Luis complicates her criminal intentions, and she finds herself torn between her past and the possibility of a different future. The story masterfully shows how trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Luis is betrayed not once but repeatedly, first by Bonnie's deceit, then by the realization that she is not who she claimed to be, and finally by her involvement in an elaborate scheme to steal his fortune. Yet despite all of this, Luis continues to search for the truth, not only about her, but also about himself. In doing so, he confronts his own emotional limitations and ultimately embraces vulnerability, even if it puts him in mortal danger. Bonnie's character is equally rich and layered. She's not merely a femme fatale. She's a woman shaped by hardship, forced into a life of survival through manipulation. Her scars, both physical and emotional, speak to years of damage and desperation. Yet, it's her decision to save Luis from the consequences of her actions that marks the turning point in her character. When she chooses to protect him instead of killing him, she reclaims a piece of her humanity. Her final sacrifice, taking the blame and being imprisoned, suggests that deep down, she longs for absolution. The narrative also delves into the idea that love cannot be manufactured or controlled. No matter how well one plans or deceives, emotions have a way of betraying even the most careful of strategies. Bonnie did not expect to fall in love. Luis did not expect to be vulnerable. Walter, her partner and enabler, did not expect Bonnie to break ranks. Their emotions made them unpredictable and ultimately human. In the end, even with Bonnie's escape and reunion with Luis, the story leaves the viewer pondering whether they have truly broken free of their past, or if they're simply continuing a cycle under a new disguise. Their final moments together, scamming gamblers with secret hand signals, suggest that while love may have saved them from destruction, it hasn't necessarily saved them from themselves. This film is a compelling reminder that love can bloom in the most unlikely of places, but it often comes at a cost. Trust, once broken, is fragile. Redemption is hard-won. And sometimes the greatest deceptions are the ones we tell ourselves.